welcome all of you to this launch of Radical Reckonings, Survival in Patriarchy by the infamous Renate Klein. And it's really wonderful. But Renate will tell you why it's even more about why it's really wonderful, because this book has been a long time in the making. Anyway, just to do a quick welcome, that we respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. The countries on which Spinifex offices are situated are Jiru, Bunurong, Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Gundungurra and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So this evening, the order of things is that I will introduce Robyn, and then Robyn will speak about the book, and then Renate will speak. And if there's time at the end, then we'll have some questions or discussions, and then thank yous at the very end. So now it's my turn to introduce Robyn, and now the thing has gone off the page. Here it is. All right. So I first met Robyn at the Sydney Women Writers Festival in 1982. That was Poet Robyn. I met her again, though I don't know the date, as a women's studies academic and critic of IVF, possibly at the Salon. There are two, at least, Robyns. To ease my confusion, I checked Wikipedia, which has a very boring entry. Then I checked her own website. Too much information. So this is therefore a tale of two co-conspirators, Robyn and Renate. By the time Renate came to Australia in 1986, I knew Robyn better and Renate not at all. Robyn and Renate made a huge success of women's studies at Deakin University with the Summer Institute conferences and of incredible and popular courses in women's studies. Renate in 1986 was awarded a Georgina Sweet Fellowship to come to Australia to do research about women who'd gone through IVF, and they worked together at Deakin from 1987 to 1996, and together and separately ran the Australian Women's Research Centre. In that time, Robyn and Renate were regularly on TV, in the newspapers, and contributed to government and university committees. They were the not-so-fun bits. They also laughed a lot. Robyn has several books available from Spinifex and many from other publishers. The books available from Spinifex are Perverse Serenity, a story about Robyn and an Irish monk, a long and complicated story. Also, This Intimate War, a bilingual collection in English and Turkish about Gallipoli from the perspective of both sides. And there's also Living Laboratories about women and the IVF industry. Renate, too, in the 1980s, published books in English and German, including Theories of Women's Studies and Test Tube Women and others. So when they worked together, the result was really quite explosive in the best possible sense. Radical Reckonings is Renate's 20th book, and they will tell us much more in this launch, but I will pass over to Robyn, and then I'll introduce Renate after Robyn has spoken.
Right. Okay. So I don't know how the word slipped into your press releases, Renate, but it said old. And I think you'll always be vividly youth vibrant. So you should erase that now from all of your blurbs, I think.
It just means that 80 is the new young, 80 is the new 50.
Excellent. Good. So we were fortunate to be in the cohort of the women's liberation movement when Janice Raymond's book, A Passion for Friends, was published and revisioned friendships for women away from the deeply divisive norms we'd grown up with. And your book contains many names of important friendships you created and have maintained all your life. You are a very good friend. So, with over 40 years of friendship and all our stories, I'm deeply moved that I was given the honour of launching this book for the second time. It's fine work and will remain now in the one place, and with its excellent references at the end of each chapter, allow readers to follow up further in each area Renate has tackled. In its absolutely beautiful design by Deb Snipson, what a stunner, I see skeins. Yes, the fabric of life, but in this case, really only the writing and activist life of Renate Klein. So let me introduce you to the woman. Worried, a little bit worried there.
Oh, I know what you said in the bookshop, so I can just imagine what you're going to come out with now, but that's fine.
Okay. This is a woman who tracked ants on her knees in the Sahara and spoke Swahili. This is a woman who used to sleep in Switzerland under a terrarium, glass snake house, for some years. This is a woman with whom I danced many times, and I remember the slogan of the women's liberation movement, if I can't dance, I don't want to join the revolution. Over many years and in many venues, including in a wonderful lesbian bar in Quebec, when we were addressing a forum for the government with our Finrage colleagues, Jenna Correa, Jalna Hanma, sadly since left the planet, Janice Raymond, and at the Women's Ball in Melbourne, where I, of course, claim that I introduced Renate and Sue, although Susan has a different memory. And from that came their creation together of Spinifex Press. By this time, Renate had become a lesbian and no longer slept under snakes. This is a woman who, originally a Swiss-German biologist, now a Swiss-Australian, was a research associate in neurobiology in Zurich with an MSc from Zurich University. She then advanced, in my opinion, to a BA Honours in Women's Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and a PhD in Sociology of Education from the University of London. In 1986, her advancement in academic life continued when I invited her to apply for that Georgina Sweet Fellowship, and she came to Deakin for 6 months to undertake research into the experiences of women and IVF, which she duly did. And then she just never went home. So she later became Associate Professor in Women's Studies at Deakin, where she taught international feminism, reproductive medicine, importantly, feminist research methodology and feminist ethics until 2006. Since the early 1980s, when we met and began to work together, she's been a leading critic in the work on the new reproductive technologies, from IVF to genetics, abortion, contraception, population control, drug regimes such as HRT and Gardasil, and so-called surrogacy. And her well-organised chapters in the book reflect this. As Susan said, she is co-author and editor of 19 books, including Radically Speaking, Feminism Reclaimed, co-edited with Diane Bell, Surrogacy, a Human Rights Violation, and Not Dead Yet, Feminism, Passion and Women's Liberation, co-edited with Susan Hawthorne. She is co-founder of Finrage and Abolish Surrogacy Australia, an original signatory to Stop Surrogacy Now, a member of the International Coalition for the Abolition of Surrogate Motherhood with the Declaration of Casablanca, and co-founder of Spinifex Press. We worked together for women in the Women's Studies program I founded at Deakin in 1981. And as she writes in the book, these were exciting times. Later, we created the Australian Women's Research Centre, sadly destroyed in 2001. As Renate's book shows, the Thriving program was successfully demolished by Joan Beaumont, then Dean. But not before thousands had benefited from our programs and from the Women's Studies Summer Institutes, which literally changed lives, released and emboldened women, created feminist thinking in a population which went on to work for women in academic life, refuges, rape crisis centres, government, the law, and more. After I had breast cancer and burnout in 1996, Renate valiantly fought on until the university failed us and women's studies and the centre both disappeared. Another erasure in the long line of the erasure of women's achievements. So this is a woman of courage, tenacity, strong opinions, and firm woman-centred values. Now to this book, a superb production and an excellent selection of Renate's writing in the areas I've mentioned. It is hallmarked by her depth of research and knowledge, the breadth of its reach, and the clarity of her thinking. In one piece she writes, "This article attempts to bring some of these crucial early works to attention again in the hope that today's emerging feminist critics of reproductive and genetic engineering don't have to reinvent the wheel and can draw and build upon the earlier work." And this can be said of the book's entirety. The first section of the book relates her development in women's studies, which also traces the pathways it actually came. This her story is important because it was the creation of knowledges out of the women's liberation movement, which she makes clear. And I'd remind us all that radical feminism, radical means coming from the root. Her disappointment, which I share, at the twisting of women's studies into gender studies led to an inevitable loss of radical theory and of enlightenment for many women. She concludes by saying, "It is my ardent hope that new versions of autonomous women's studies will flourish again before too long, such as Cherry Smiley's Women's Studies Online in Canada." Her work on feminist research methodology has been groundbreaking, freeing many from the patriarchal defined barriers to understanding women's experiences and realities. The section on reproductive technologies, genetic work, are excellent in the analysis, data, and development of feminist theory and activism. Her ability to reflect on her own process in research and methodology, for example, in working with IVF women clients and so-called surrogates, brought their realities of using these processes into the light. Chapters on the medicalisation of women's bodies, these supposedly forever failing shells we inhabit, are horrifying. In her section, Medicalised for Life, she explores the variety of drug interventions which have dangerous side effects and results for young girls to older women. They also deal with the way women's experiences are not listened to. And recently in Victoria, we had a series in the Age newspaper on the misogyny in medicine still going on. It was actually titled Misogynistic Medicine. I'm particularly engaged by a number of quotes, but particularly this one on page 248. Dr. Barry Wren from the Royal Women's Hospital in Sydney describes menopause as, quote, "a sex-linked, female-dominant, endocrine deficiency disease with specific symptoms and signs which should be investigated and managed in a very careful and considered fashion for the remainder of a woman's life." Renate traces the interrelationship between drug prescription during a woman's life, where inevitably it is difficult for her to refuse, not being responsible, and suffering if she goes off some long-term medications. Of course, as she points out, pharmaceutical companies are the winners in all of this. The work in the book is wide-ranging, and her section on cyborgs is frankly frightening. But she writes, quote, I conclude my article on cyberfeminism with some holistic strategies for social change. Ever the optimist, then and now, I believe in the survival instinct that women have shown throughout the millennia when we have withstood femicides, ranging from the witch hunts to honour killings, and the whole gamut of patriarchal medical crimes that continue unabated. Renate writes of the need for a renewed women's health movement, excuse me, to avoid misogynistic, racist, homophobic outcomes. Quote, I suggest we need to love ourselves, our bodies, and other women, that we need to stress the values of horizontal cooperation rather than vertical hierarchies, without reverting to the tyranny of structurelessness so well described by Joe Freeman in 1975. In a broader context, I desperately hope that women in general, but young feminists in particular, become more critical about the rapidly increasing medicalisation of people's, especially women's, lives. We did precisely that in the 1970s and 1980s when Doctor Knows Best was replaced by women's own health initiatives and alternative health care. There is no reason why such rebellion can't happen again. The book finishes, quote, with my battle cry against patriarchal control of women's lives, globalised fragmentation of bodies and mind. She outlines patriarchal patterns and pathways into resistance which radical feminists need. Patterns such as invisibility and erasure, and I think I could still refer people to Dale Spender's book, Women of Ideas and What Men Have Done to Them, 500 Years of Feminism. Doublethink, the clash of belief systems, lies, fake rights, distortion, appropriation, fragmentation, dissociation. Being told you are overreacting. And one of my favourites, pulling the wool over our eyes. In 1996, she wrote, my wish for readers of this book is thus to rise up, forget politeness, forget being kind, meet together in consciousness-raising groups and think of the birthright that every girl and every woman anywhere in the world has to live a good life in a world free of oppression and exploitation. Do whatever is in your power, big and small, to bring the new revolution we so desperately need. So I would like to actually finish by having some questions for Renate. I don't know which way round you want to do this. I would say that since the last pieces of this book, Renate's work has continued to grow, of course, and she continues to monitor, research, write, and involve herself in activism with current situations for women in these same areas. And I declare this book well and truly launched. May she sail ever onwards, both book and author. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I actually need to introduce Renate much after that. But let me just have a quick scan. No, that's really covered everything that's in the front of Radical Reckonings, Survival in Patriarchy, which I hope you'll all run out and buy if you haven't already. It's a great book. It'll keep you going for quite a while. But as Renate says, if you want to cheat, you can just read the introductions to the sections.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I think that, Robyn, you should just ask me some questions. But before you do that, I am just so very grateful for your great summary of my life, including the snakes and the ants. Only you would know that. And the book. And yes, it is very true that, I mean, as I say in the book, this book has taken 20 years to be published, because in 2006, my wonderful Susan and a friend of mine, Belinda Morris, presented me with an outline for a book of my papers. And I was so moved. They did that to me because I was still smarting from all the events at Deakin. And so that cheered me up with that. And they did, until I actually looked at the pieces included, and I thought, unless Spinifex devotes the next 5 years to publishing Renate Klein, which probably wouldn't have been an economic successful venture, it's too big. So then I sort of tinkered on around the edges, couldn't do it. Then I had to write more things, and then I forgot about it. And then 10 years later, when we moved up to Queensland, to our forever home in the beautiful tropics, although it is dreadfully hot at the moment, having a heat wave for 4 weeks already. But you know, one doesn't quarrel, one doesn't complain, one likes it, well, sort of. I found this box called Radical Reckonings, and I opened it and I thought, oh, I remember. And I still thought, yeah, it's a good idea, because, you know, we all know that as feminists, we have to document our work, because if we want the future to be different, young women have to be able to read our work and build on that. So I thought, all right, I'll take it with me, which I did, and it came up with me. And then it sat unopened in the cupboard for another 6 years. And then by chance I opened it and I thought, oh, that old thing. Okay, well, maybe I should. And Susan said, well, yes, you should. And you know, it's already been in the Spinifex catalog once, so you know, just do something. So I did, following, of course, Madam Spinifex. And it was still too long, and I was very tempted to say, I can't do it. And she told me that just simply wasn't an option. And then Deb Snipson did this fabulous new cover, so it was even less of an option, because it got put into the Spinifex catalog again. Then it was delayed by another year because it was still too big. But meanwhile, I ordered the pieces, and then I started to write the introductions. And Robyn said it, or Susan, I can't remember. It is actually a cheap way to read my book. If you just if you just read the introductions to the 6 chapters, you know what this book is about, and you get a good idea about what I'm about. And I must say myself that I quite like my introductions. They took a long time to write, because I was really wanting to be factual and go back and you know, put a lot of details in. And so I am so immensely pleased and happy that this book is finally out. And the most gratification is that I don't have to do it again. It's done, it's finished. Somebody else can actually do the painful process, because, you know, just to let you know, it's not for the faint-hearted to do a collection of your old work. It really isn't. Some of the papers from the 80s, there was nothing. I mean, there was a hard copy. It was lucky to have a hard copy. So that had to be scanned. And yeah, they said so easy peasy. It's not so easy peasy. And that's where Pauline Hopkins comes in, the play. I don't know if she's here already. She was so very patient with me. And when I said, I can't do it, there's got lines everywhere and paragraphs. I can't do it. And she said, don't you worry, I'll do it. And she did. And then in the end, our wonderful typesetter, Helen Chrissy, did the rest. I mean, this sounds very mundane, you know. Often it's not just about the great idea that once in your life you put on the page. It's actually about the here and now, and how to get these ideas into a new book. But I have done it. The book is here. The book is probably still too big, but the book looks beautiful. And the book had 6 sections in it. But although I have to say, thank you, Robyn, it is gorgeous. Even last year, it was still too big, and I had to chuck out a whole section on population control, which is very dear to my heart, because, you know, population control have always been the reverse of the same coin that Robyn and I were investigating, which is the IVF and new reproductive technologies. But of course, it was the old reproductive technologies that poor women in poor countries were subjugated to, like abortion and very bad, eventually long-acting contraceptives. And we owe a great deal of thanks to Farida Akhtar from Bangladesh, who did the first study on Norplant, which was the first contraceptive implant where one rod was put in a woman's arm. And she did the study in Bangladesh. And, you know, when this rod was inserted, women started to bleed. They were nauseous, they put on weight, they were tired all the time, and they wanted this rod removed, and the providers wouldn't remove it. They said, no, you're part of this study, we can't remove it. And Farida wrote a book about it in 1999, Norplant. And so this was a really important, and so I did quite a lot, and I wrote quite a lot, including also the one-child policy in China that was coming in then, which was also incredible human rights violation. So, well, do you want to ask me some more questions, Robyn, or should I just go on? I think you're muted. No.
Yeah, I'll just unmute myself. No, it's interesting though when you talk about Farida. You know, I remember when population control kind of inserted it as an issue to be considered too. And I think one of the things that reminds me of is how a lot of this development was happening before the law, the public or feminism had actually had a chance to even consider it or see it or understand it. And my first work was in donor insemination. And I remember thinking, I was talking to people who'd used donor insemination in the hospital systems. And at that point, I just thought that happened with animals. You know, it's kind of, it was this absolute unveiling of information that we had to develop theory with. And Farida's contribution was so enormous, so enormous. But I'm just wondering, in terms of questions, you know, you do speak in the chapters on women's studies on postmodernism, which, you know, infiltrated the universities in a big way. And I just wonder whether you still see that impact in a broader setting.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, somebody asked me when I talked about my book in England, and she said, what would have to happen for women's studies to come back? And my answer was, well, all the academics that have come through postmodernism and are now professors would have to resign. And they won't do that. So I think we are, for the next, 10, 15 years, we are stuck with these queer studies and gender studies, which basically make nobody happy, because gender study was supposed to get more men involved in this field. And I mean, we all know that men in general, and there are always exceptions, men, they only have one view of women, and it's not about gender studies really. So it just backfired badly. And like when in 2002, as Robyn mentioned, our wonderful, wonderful women's studies program that I had managed to rescue when Robyn unfortunately had her breast cancer in 96 and dropped out, and actually get even more students involved. And I could only do that because we had a great team. And then we get this bloody woman-hating dean, and I'll repeat her name again, Joan Beaumont, because she's still around in Canberra. Karma hasn't got her yet. And she was a war historian, and she was so clever. She basically cut the undergraduate program. And of course, out of our 1,000+ students, many, many, many were in the undergraduate program. And so that fell by the wayside. But now going back to postmodernism, well, maybe continuing. I then stayed at Deacon. My job, she didn't actually attack my job, probably because she thought I would get some support. So I stayed there because I had 13 PhD students, and I just knew if I left, which would have been better for my career, but if I left, I would be thrown to, our colleagues. And sadly, a lot of our colleagues were totally into postmodernism because you almost had to be, unless you were a radical feminist, and you just didn't do that, like I didn't, and Robyn had never done that, and people teaching women's studies didn't either, but they were all on contract. So Joan Beaumont just basically had to wait until their contracts ran out. She didn't even have to sack somebody. So even now, more than 20 years later, I get so irate. And I did do an interview with Holly Lawford Smith, and I include the link in the book. So postmodernism, like it really, it came in from France, and then we published Summer Brodrick's book, wonderful book, Nothing Matters, one of our earliest Spinifex books in 1992, I think. There was a brilliant book about, the French boys that are behind postmodernism. And then when I started to work with Diane Bell on Radically Speaking, we planned and we had a whole section on postmodernism with people writing critiques of postmodernism, from Jan Raymond to Sheila Jeffries to Joan Hoff to many others. And I thought, right, okay, well, I see that there are all these so-called feminists saying that they're writing postmodern body writing, and I thought I have to read that. And I honestly spent almost a year reading these papers, and there were quite a few prominent Australian academics involved. And so I read and read and read, and I ate an awful lot of chocolate because that was the only way to survive this, because they wrote supposedly about the body, but they wrote about around the body, in the body, through the body, above the body. And what was missing from these body writings were the women. And I kept saying, I read pages and pages and pages about writing on the body, but I wonder, where are the women? Because there were no women. So then I started to write my paper. And then also came Donna Haraway with her idea of the cyborg. And women they fell over themselves to say how wonderful this was. And I thought, how wonderful. So if you're not just a body, but you have technology attached to your body, because the cyborg is both your body and technology, what's so good about this? And so I incorporated some of that in this paper, but also Susan and I then did an extra book on cyberfeminism in 1999. And so it's interesting, and I'm very, very proud of that chapter from Radically Speaking, because in some way I actually bring up already some critiques that have only come up in the last few years by women such as Jennifer Bilek, who has written about transsexual, transgender, and that whole trans phenomena. But I mentioned it already in 96, although, I wasn't focused on trans, but it was this total devotion to getting rid of the body and just to be pure mind. And I quote already a couple of scientists who are still there, still work for Google and have their own companies. And they were already then saying, well, one day we will be able to download our minds onto a computer disk, and we'll just be, we don't really need the body. Bodies are really bad. And then you go back, way, way back to all the people who've written about, the mind-body split, and who said, oh, well, bodies are just dirty, they bleed, mostly they're women's bodies, we really don't want that. And if I can just refer to a recent book we have published, which is called Man Without Being by Andrea Aurora, Linnea, which is just a brilliant, brilliant book. And she really tackles this whole phenomena that men, and it wasn't what's good about her book is not just what men do to women, it's actually what men do to themselves, because they just hate the idea of having living flesh and having living anything. It's all supposed to be in the mind. And Aurora has a wonderful passage in about Descartes, who brought up the whole stuff about the body-mind split. And he said, I will never die. I don't want to die. I will live forever because my mind will get me through, forget about the body. And then sadly, at the age of not very old, like in his 50s, he died in a couple of months of pneumonia. So much for just, only your mind is doing it. So, but I'm going sort of like around it. To answer your question, Robyn, postmodernism is more important than ever. I actually really think that without the success of postmodernism, and it has been very successful, ideas such as the whole transgender phenomenon would not have been able to be developed, because in postmodernism it basically says there is no objectivity, there is no truth. If you look at a table and you say, oh, this is a nice table, it's round and it's green, and then you stand up and you go to the other side and say, oh, sorry, no, it's actually a rectangle and it's red. How exciting, all these different subjectivities. And so you get yourself on a plane where nothing is real anymore, there's no truth, and you can basically just believe whatever you want. And the whole queer studies is the same. Queer used to be a word that said something is weird, you're a bit weird, so you're queer. And now it just basically means you can be anything. You can be anything. You don't have to believe in anything. You can just make up your own world. And that's why we have people who say, children, but adults too, but people who say, oh, I am not a man, I am not a woman, I'm a furry, and I want you to address me as a cat. And this is actually a real example. I heard that in England, in some English school, the children who said they were furries, and then they asked the school to bring in cat litter. So, for the toilets. And it was at that point that the school said, no, this is going too far, we're not going to do that, which is a funny example. But what we really have to ask the question, a very serious question, is why did so many governments, mostly in Western countries, but also in the so-called third world as well, why did they give in to this absolutely irrational thinking that a person can change sex? I mean, all you need to do is a little swap from your nose or from your mouth, and you find either XX or XY chromosomes in every cell of your body, and you know that therefore you're a girl or a boy. And yes, there are some intersex people, but even they have X and Y. There's no third sex, and so it is so simple. And yet, this ideology has just been so successful that in Australia, in every state, we have self-ID laws. And just the fact what I just said now on this Zoom will probably in Victoria get me in trouble, because I'm not supposed to make fun of anybody who is trans, and not really making fun of them, but I'm just saying it is irrational and it cannot happen. You cannot change sex. Now, luckily, this is slowly changing. It's slowly changing. And just yesterday, it was announced in New Zealand that they have now, their government prohibited the puberty blockers. Now, puberty blockers are really, really terrible drugs given to children who go through puberty, and it was said for a long time, oh, they're reversible. If they don't like it, they can stop it and it's all okay. Well, it's not okay, and they're not reversible, and they lead to thinning of bones, so osteoporosis. The children get, or these young adults will get osteoporosis in their 20s. They lead to brain problems with your developing brain, because adolescents, they're not developed yet. They have to go through puberty. And so that all of that has come in and is low everywhere in Australia. And New Zealand, good on them, has now just make it illegal. Whereas in Australia, they're still going do 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 and do 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 do, and the NHMRC just has formed a working group. And you look at the working group and you think, really, is that going to lead to something? Because when you look at the people who formed this working group, I don't have a lot of confidence. So a very long answer to your question, Robyn, but postmodernism is still very, very important. This whole notion that there's no truth, and there's just anything you want to say has to go. And if I say to you, sorry, Robyn, but as of now, I'm not a woman, I'm a man. My name is Renato. We don't know at the end. And if you don't say Renate to me, I'm going to sue you. And you have to do that. And if you don't do it, you're being very unkind. That's always the slogan. These poor people like me who wants to be Renate, you have to be kind to them. You can't be unkind and say to them, that's gobbledygook, it's just stupid. You cannot change sex. Now more and more women are saying it, and we have, of course, at Spinifex published 22 books that deal with the trans topic. They're not all on the trans topic, but they have content of the trans topic. And what's the result of that? We are basically shunned from being reviewed. Our books are not reviewed anymore because we dare to touch this sort of holy cow. And of course, very pleased we are touching this holy cow. And Betsy McClellan is here. She has written a book on democracy, and she dares to mention trans for only about a couple of pages, and that's already been said is really bad. Then we have a book by Janice Raymond, Doublethink, and that's really bad. And we're very, very pleased and proud that we published all these books. So, we're standing strong, and the madness will go, but it's leaving behind an awful lot of parents who went through the most dreadful thing when the mother wanted to go with the puberty blockers and the alternative sex hormones, and the father didn't want to, so they end up in the family court. And normally the family court, until recently, has said, yeah, that's a good thing, just give them the drugs, it's good. But just recently, a judge called Strum, he stood up and said, it's not a good thing, and we have all this research now from Europe, and I don't allow it. So there is movement. The madness will pass. So I just have to stay alive for a few more years.
Well, hopefully it'll be more than a few. So,
but when you become an octogenarian, as Betty McClellan has called me so nicely, well, the writing is on the wall.
oh, well, I think that writing can be on the wall at any point in life, actually.
Well, that's true. That's
we're fortunate to get the years we get.
Yeah.
I think there's interesting comments about postmodernism. For me, I think the worst thing was that it deactivated the women's liberation movement because its emphasis was on fragmentation and not on centering. So, but I guess just one of the things that you do write in the book is you talk about Hester Eisenstein, the commitment to optimism, which she calls a feminist political stance, that is the feminist political stance, to be optimistic. And I know over the many years, we had conversations about this where you would despair, and I would say, well, it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and we're in a social movement, so it's not, you can't expect in our lifetimes to see everything solved. If we go back and look at what's been achieved, there are some massive changes that have benefited women. There's still a hell of a long way to go. And I would, for example, I would include it in that. I've just been, I don't know whether I should be able to push another book, but I've just been reading a book called Telling Times by Carmel McDonald Graham and Susan Medallia. And some of the change that you see, for example, that no-fault divorce came in. I mean, that was a huge thing for women because before that it had to be adultery. And so what happened was many women were left behind by the breadwinner in the family. Lots of things like that. Teachers who had to resign when they got pregnant, up into family law that discriminated against women. So there were really, there were big changes. So you wrote about the quote, green shoots of hope. And you wrote, I'm convinced that we will see another women's revolution, another uprising of women who will stand up for their sisters wherever they live in the world. But despite the fact that I would like to announce the imminent start of this new wave of rebelling women, alas, some more patience is needed. So I guess I would ask you how you see the future and the role of young women. And I think we probably have some young women listening at the moment. So I guess I'd like you to speak a little bit about that.
Yes, well, thank you for reminding me of the optimism. Of course, I am an optimist, because if I wasn't an optimist, I would have given up long ago. I would have just be sitting in my rocking chair, drinking my gin and tonic, and just think, fuck you, why should I even bother putting another book out? And I mean, especially this book was really a lot of work. And I know that other people are doing the same. So, Betty McClellan is just writing, Janice Renate is still writing, Julie Bindel is writing. So many, many really good women are writing books, so we can't give up. And as to young women, I mean, we know some wonderful, wonderful radical women. And remember when we had the book launch in the readings store in Hawthorne, there was this group of young women, and they were just wonderful. They came up and said, "Oh, this is just so good, and we should take this home, and we think of that." And I mean, in a way, that's not too different from when you were teaching women's studies. Students would come to us and say, God, reading this and then discussing it in class has just changed my whole outlook on the world. I still get students who come up to me and say, "Remember when I was a deacon?" And I sort of thought, maybe. I'm sure you get that too. And so I think with everything that we write, we can only hope that somehow or other younger women will read it. And like my book would be very good to use for consciousness raising groups to, have one section at a time and then discuss it. And the thing is, many women really young women have really no idea what I'm writing about, because, for instance, writing about the abortion pill, are you 4 and 6? This has become such a taboo subject, because when you talk about it, it's all wonderful, it's all great. Now there's this pill that women can just take and have an abortion. Well, it's not at all just so easy and so good. And Janice Raymond and Renate and I have written a book about this, and we call it the new backyard abortion. But when you say that, it gets you, before cancel culture even was invented, we were cancelled. Or the cervical vaccine Gardasil. Most people, if they even know about it, they think, "Oh, great, okay, the vaccine so that our kids don't get cervical cancer." If only. And it is, there's stories behind all of this, which, I mean, I can't just, now get into it in 10 minutes. But that's the thing. That's why I really, really hope that young women will read my book. As for older women, what we see happening at the moment is like two things: ADHD and HRT. Now, ADHD has become my new what do you call it? I'm so cross, because on my Facebook page and wherever I get ads and said, you want to do an ADHD test? For older adults, take your test now. No, I don't want to do an ADHD test. I don't think I had ADHD, but why would I want to know that I have ADHD so that some doctor can give me pills? And just this week, it was announced that GPs can now deal with adults as well and give them drugs. Talk about ADHD, and if they think you have it, give you drugs. Because until now, they could only talk to children. And I just think, hey, women, just look at yourself, look at your body. And in fact, that is the message that I give from my whole book. We have to reclaim our bodies. The wonderful slogan, our bodies ourselves, which is essential from the women's liberation movement. If we don't act on that, and if you quoted me at the beginning of saying we have to love our bodies, and that sounds a bit mushy and all that, but we have to, because we only have one body. We're stuck in this body, and like, especially as we get older, some of us don't like very much what the bodies do, but I think we have to manage our bodies as much as we can ourselves, instead of running to the doctor and say, whoa, tell me what's wrong with me. And the doctors say, yeah, all right, we do a blood test, and then we do a few scans, and then we tell you what's wrong with it. And so you walk out and you think, shit, I have so many things wrong with me. I didn't know they were wrong, because I don't actually feel that bad. I feel just a bit old. And so I really think, like I think you mentioned that, Robyn, in the 70s, there was a book called How to Stay Out of the Gynecologist's Office, which I loved. Nowadays, it's like, how do I run into the gynecologist's office? And look at what's happening with HRT. HRT is a very long story. It came up in the 70s and was said, oh, feminine forever. Women took it in droves. Then it came out that actually there was only estrogen, and that caused a lot of endometrial cancer. So, women stopped taking it. Then some very clever marketing said, we just put progesterone onto it and give it a different name. So it became HRT, and women started to take it again. Then in 2002, a very large nurses study in Canada said very bad. They even stopped their research because it led to many, many more breast cancers and cardiovascular problems, heart attacks. So women stopped it again. And then last year, all of a sudden, I saw that menopause was a topic again, and I saw a nutritionist saying all women should be taking HRT. And I thought, have I missed something? Has there been some new research? So I Googled it and I looked it up. No, there had not been any new research, but the 2002 results had been reinterpreted. And so now it goes that if you give HRT to younger women in the 50s, then it's okay. They don't get breast cancer, they don't get the cardiovascular events. And women are buying it. Women are buying it. And then on top of it, they now given HRT a new name. It's now called MHT, menopausal hormone therapy. It's exactly the same. They haven't even bothered changing anything. And I just really, really, really wish that women, old and young, would sit down and say, okay, I'm really not that stupid. I've lived a life. I've held many jobs. I've stood up against many, many, many men and got my children and got, boxed myself through all unbelievable stuff, violence, etc. And I don't need to run to the next expert to let me tell me what's wrong with my body and then get drugged. And I really, it's really the main message from my book, Our bodies, ourselves, get back, women, love your bodies and just trust yourself. And I'm not saying that if you break a leg, you don't go and have it fixed. I'm not that stupid. Or if you have long-term symptoms that you need to see somebody. But it's just that, like, I've got a bit of balance problems. Maybe I should go and see a doctor, and then I will know what the problem is. Well, the problem is I'm 80 plus, and 80 plus women have balance problems. So really, just get down to earth. In general, maybe that's also a message of my book. Get down to earth, enjoy life as long as you can, because you never know when it's going to be the last moment. Get a dog if you don't have one. And yeah, and do whatever you can to enjoy life, and which is very difficult in this terrible life, and with all these, wars from Gaza to Ukraine, to all these other places, and to see Trump doing whatever Trump is doing. But yes, the optimism comes in again. And so I think, so my last chapter, which is, radical feminist resistance, and I actually comment that practically all my books had this last chapter that's called Feminist Resistance, and what was the problem with this? So I say, well, you can say, I'm still waiting for the resistance, so I'm a loser, hasn't come yet. Or you can put a positive spin on and say, yeah, I'm still waiting for it, but there is waves. And I do believe, everything goes in waves. We will have another feminist wave. What will start it? I don't know. What it will look like? I don't know. I might hate it. I might not be here anymore. So when I sit somewhere, in my nice little place, no, actually, I'll be a cockatoo after I die, in case you don't know that. I'm a silver-crested cockatoo after I die. So I can sit on a tree and I can say, look at these, look at them. What they're saying is just so stupid. They haven't learned anything. Or I can say, fabulous. Now they're doing everything Robyn and Renate wanted them to do. So,
well, I'm really disappointed to hear that you're coming back as a silver-crested cockatoo, because down here in Victoria, all they do is ruin everybody's window frames and decks, and and create chaos and contribute nothing. I would much prefer to think of you as a rainbow lorikeet. So
I'm actually going to come in here.
It's time to finish, Susan, isn't it?
Say that it's 2 minutes until we finish the recording. So I just want to make a very quick list of thank yous. So first of all, thank you, Robyn. Thank you so much for launching the book twice and doing a wonderful job. It's really fantastic. And of course, thank you to Renate for finally getting it done. I'm really pleased that it is done. And really, what else can I say? But I'd also like to say thank you to everybody at Spinifex who's been involved in the creation of this book. I mean, to Belinda back in the day, but also to Danielle, our office manager, who's the woman who sends the books out, to Rachel, who's the co-host of this session, and who is our marketing manager. And as she said before, she loves putting the promo out about this book because the colours are so beautiful. To Pauline, who edited so much of the book. I did some as well, but she really worked her way through it. To Caitlin, if you're on social media, you are seeing Caitlin's work there. And in terms of the production of the book, to Deb Snibson for the absolutely beautiful cover, and to Helen Christie, who typesets and designs all our books, and she does a fantastic job. And of course, to all of you for coming along this evening. And for any of you who've been to any of the other sessions, there is also a conversation between Renate and Sheila Jeffries on the Women's Declaration International website that was done last Sunday. And some of you may have been in places like
sorry, did you get a fright when Renate suddenly appeared behind?
No, I knew she was coming.
She disappeared.
I got just thrown off. I think. Oh, did you?
You did.
Oh,
You got thrown off.
Cockatoo was too much for so.
Yeah.
No, it was too much for the cockatoos.
So I don't know. brilliant. I'm
well,
glad that you continue.
luckily I'm here then.
And Robyn, yeah.
And the rest of us as well. So my thanks to everybody. Really, it's been a great pleasure.